We're excited to welcome everyone back to the second installment of Dr. Aryeh fascinating class on Hegyonei Uziel. We also would like to thank our partners, the American Sephardi Federation, for collaborating with us on these classes. And this class will be Lezecher Nishmat Rivka Bat Pesach, your grandmother, one of the students of the Chabura. Without further ado, I hand over to Dr. Tepper to continue his class on Hegyonei Uziel. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ben, very much for having me. And I'm excited to be here. And thank you to all of you in the audience who are here on Zoom to listen. I will begin today, and let me thank the Chabura and the American Sephardi Federation, Jason, Avi, and Sina, and everyone who made this possible. So we will begin today by quickly revisiting the main points, ideas, and background from last week's session. And then I will present an outline of Hegyonei Uziel and then dive back into Hegyonei Uziel. Along the way, we will meet Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Ben Sion, who's Rabbi Uziel's contemporary, a rooted cosmopolitan Renaissance man from Ottoman Sephardi Jerusalem who learned with Rabbi Uziel at Tiferet Yerushalayim and who shared a very interesting approach to the Kabbalistic tradition with Rabbi Uziel. And let me just, one point for present purposes, which is that I encourage you, if you have questions as I'm presenting the information, as we're reading texts, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask the question. If it doesn't fit in with the flow, I will say so as the maestro of the conversation and say, we'll deal with this a bit later, but don't hesitate to ask any questions if you have any as we go along. Okay, so Hegyonei Uziel, I'm going to have the timeline up as background, and then we're going to, as I mentioned, we'll have the recap and then dive back into the text. Hegyonei Uziel is less a book of Jewish thought than a devotional work, Sefer Avodat Hashem, that is deeply grounded in Jewish thought, similar to Chovot HaLevavot, the duties of the heart. In Hegyonei Uziel, Rabbi Uziel offers life-giving Torah that directs us to the soul and the soul's connection to God, in order to augment the soul's powers in pursuit of our te'udah, or goal, or mission, in its most expansive form. Hegyonei Uziel celebrates human excellence wherever it's found and facilitates serving God in all of our ways. Regarding the main stations of his biography, Rabbi Uziel was born in 1880, and at age 12, he began learning at Tiferet Yerushalayim, the broad-minded yeshiva in Ottoman Jerusalem that taught Limudei Kodesh. Together with history, sciences, and languages, Rabbi Uziel was fluent in 5 languages: Ladino, Hebrew, Arabic, Turkish, and French. Rabbi Uziel was orphaned from his father at age 14, and with responsibility for taking care of his family resting on his shoulders, he spent his days working and his nights learning until at age 20, when he began teaching at Tiferet Yerushalayim. And at age 31, in 1911, he was appointed the Ḥakham Bashi of Yafo, alongside Rav Kook. In Rav Uziel's inaugural drasha as the Ḥakham Bashi of Yafo, with Rav Kook in attendance, Rav Uziel identified 2 aspects to the Nesiut HaYisraelit Ruchanit, the spiritual leadership of Israel, that assumed different but consistent forms across Jewish history. HaMechokek v'Shevet MiYehuda, which refers to the Kehuna and the Malchut, priesthood and kingship. Mechukek is a priestly spiritual power whose focus is inward, consciously attending to the soul, while Shevet MiYehuda begins from the soul but moves outward and is responsible for peace at home and engaging with the world at large. a kingly spirituality. Rev Uziel explicitly offered that Rav Kook would fulfill the role of the Mehokek, the priestly spirituality, whereas he would be Shevet Yehuda. Now, let me, this is a point that I didn't make last week, which I'd like to emphasize. This is already an extremely interesting idea that deserves to be elaborated, extended, and augmented. According to Rav Uziel, there is a kingly spirituality and a priestly spirituality, and his is the kingly spirituality. Already in Rav Uziel's deeply Jewish but worldly orientation, the malchut of his spiritual conception, we get a sense of the elements that constitute what last week I referred to as Rav Uziel's rooted cosmopolitanism. And this is, I think, a helpful term for understanding the character of classical Sephardic Judaism and to distinguish it from forms of Judaism that are current in modern Orthodoxy, such as Torah, Imid Derech Eretz, Torah, Umada, which are balancing acts. Rooted cosmopolitan Judaism is a deep rootedness which facilitates expansion and full participation in life, a worldly orientation that engages with all aspects of life, with Jews and non-Jews alike, an active life inspired and deeply informed by Judaism. Now, to be clear, Rav Uziel grew out of an Ottoman Sephardi-rooted cosmopolitanism that was at home in both the East and the West. Later in this session, if we have time, we will see this Ottoman Sephardi-rooted cosmopolitan Judaism on stage in Jazz Age Shanghai. Rav Uziel spent 2 years leading the Jewish community of Saloniki, was appointed the chief rabbi of the Yishuv, the Rishon LeZion, in 1939, and in 1948 became the first chief Sephardi rabbi of the state of Israel. He passed away in 1953. The 2 volumes of Hegyonei Uziel were originally published in 1953 and 54. Rav Uziel didn't publish Hegyonei Uziel to get a gig. He didn't publish Hegyonei Uziel to make a name for himself. The book was published at the end of an active life that was deeply informed by Jewish thought, and the book reflects that. Okay, so regarding a general outline of Hegyonei Uziel. In Hegyonei Uziel, Rav Uziel places the human soul, note, the human soul, which is one and differentiated, individuated in bodies, but he places the human soul and the soul's connection to God as the ultimate object of Jewish study, the Pardes, the enchanted garden of contemplation. But it is contemplation for the sake of action. In the introductory section to Hegyonei Uziel, Rav Uziel delineates the contours of the soul and the ways in which the soul's power is either augmented or diminished. For Rav Uziel, every human being is judged according to the degree that his or her actions augment the soul or diminish it. The Torah, like of the soul, and so were Yisoim, affliction or suffering. At the peak of the first section of Hegyonei Uziel, Rav Uziel turns suffering into strength. For Rav Uziel, not only the individual soul, but the soul of a nation grows over time according to its spiritual nourishment. And the soul of the Jewish people has grown strong through history and the spiritual discipline of the Torah. Ideally, the soul flows from God through us, augmented and made stronger and manifesting itself in our tu'udah, our goal or mission. Rav Uziel believed that the relegation of our tu'udah, our goal or mission, to the Beit Knesset and the Bet Midrash was the equivalent of relegating Judaism to a gnizah, or worse, to burying it. The return to Zion and the restoration of political sovereignty, however, enables the full expression of our human powers and the elevation of our tu'udah, which is, and I quote, the exalted aspiration to elevate humanity to the highest level of human perfection. A plurality of powers is embraced in this perfection: scientific and artistic, economic and aesthetic, all undertaken l'shem shamayim. But we only have 2 sessions, and this is the second session, so we will only see the tip of the iceberg. Last week we began to explore the introduction, where we will pick up today. Hegyonei Uziel is fascinating because of the book's breadth and depth and range of learning, but it is also fascinating thanks to Rav Uziel's literary sophistication. How he tells his story is essential to the story itself. This part of Rav Uziel's work thus far has been completely overlooked by even serious scholarly and rabbinic readers. But time and thought were invested in the work. The original idea to publish Rav Uziel's Jewish thought was advanced in 1929-1930, and the book was published 23 or 24 years later. And in the beginning of his introduction, Rav Uziel notes that when it comes to publishing a work of thought for the public, there is a great responsibility to thoroughly weigh the content and style of the work. We thus trust that Rav Uziel has invested both time and thought in the organization and writing of his work, and we should honor his time and thought by reading his work closely. Now, I need to add a footnote that will be important for future study of Hegyonei Uziel. The question of Hegyonei Uziel's literary quality is complicated, but the question of the coherence of Hegyonei Uziel in its present form. Rav Uziel passed away before the second volume was published. The second volume was published after his passing, and when we look at the 2 volumes, especially the second volume, it's not clear what Rav Uziel organized and edited and what was added patchwork after his passing. While there seem to be extraneous additions, especially in the second volume, we can clearly see that the introduction and the first section and other sections are a coherent and thoughtfully constructed whole, and that other sections in the first and second volume elaborate and extend themes from the introduction. This is a topic, if there's anyone out there, if anyone knows anyone out there looking for a PhD topic, this is a PhD topic that would be worthy of investigation. Last session, we traced the subtle, twofold manner in which Rav Uziel introduces the soul as the Pardes, the enchanted garden of contemplation. For the sake of essential context, I want to make sure that everyone understands clearly, as much as possible, what I'm sharing. I should clarify that the term Pardes is especially charged. The Hebrew Pardes, orchard or garden, comes from a Persian term that is translated into English as paradise. And if you change the vocalization of Pardes, you maintain the letters, but you just change the vowels, you get paradise. It's the same consonants. Likewise, the Arabic is baradis, if I'm not mistaken. But the term paradise comes from the same term. So this is the orchard that is paradise, and that features in a famous Agadah about 4 rabbis of the Mishnaic period in the 1st century of the Common Era who entered the Pardes, but only one of whom, Rabbi Akiva, managed to enter and exit alive, God-fearing, and sane. When Rav Uziel refers to the study of the soul as the tiyul in the Pardes, as the journey through the enchanted garden, he is offering his version on a song, an old song, to borrow an artistic parallel, what in the jazz lexicon is referred to as a standard, and you prove yourself by offering your take on the standards, because we have standards. Rav Uziel is offering his variation on a standard that has been played for 2 millennia. So we'll pick up from where Rav Uziel calls the exploration of the human soul and the soul's connection to God, tiyul bepardes, a walk through a paradise, a journey through paradise, and then trace how Rav Uziel acquires his interpretive freedom and transforms all of the Jewish tradition into building material for his particular vision of the Pardes and everything that flows outward from that vision into the world of action. Okay, are there any questions before I proceed? We're good to go? All right. I'm now reading from the introduction of Hegyonei Uziel. This is where we left off last week, after Rav Uziel has introduced the soul as the pardes. The exploration of the soul is the paradise, and he says the following: Hatiul b'pardes zeh, the journey through the pardes, mista'ef l'shnei anafim ikariyim she'alav ramaz Daniel va'amar. So this journey through paradise branches into has two main branches that Daniel, the prophet Daniel, hinted at in the following. Now he brings up two psukim from the book of Daniel, which I'll read and translate, and then I'll talk about its relevance to the Kabbalistic tradition, which will bring us into Rav Uziel's interpretive move. So in Daniel it says, Va'alu, and in the book of Daniel, this is a quote of a dream from Nebuchadnezzar. Va'alu, hine, in this vision, Nebuchadnezzar has this vision that reverberates until today. Ilan b'go'ara, there is a tree in the midst of the earth. Va'uma sagi, massively high. Chaba ilana v'takif, the tree grew and became more larger. V'rum'ei yitma l'shamaya, and its height touched the heavens. V'hazotei l'sof chol ara, and it could be seen from the ends of the earth. Afye shapir, its foliage was beautiful. V'imbe sagi, and its fruit was abundant. Umazon l'chuleve tahtohi, there is sustenance for all of creation beneath it. Umazon l'chuleve, and sustenance for all of creation. Tahtohi titlal hayot bara, in its shade, or the wild beasts found shade under it. Uva'anpohi yadorun sipare shamaya, and the birds of the heavens dwelled in its branches. Umine yetzin kol basra, and all flesh derives sustenance from this tree. Okay. These verses appear throughout Kabbalistic literature, especially in the Zohar and Tikkunei Zohar. Rav Uziel continues, Ilan Zehu, this tree is, excuse me, Ilana Dahaya, the tree of life. O Ilana Kadosh, B'lashonan Sharbotenu Marid Berazin Ilayin Kedishin, or the holy tree in the language of our teachers, our rabbis, the masters of the secrets, of the masters of the supernal holy secrets. Shuhu remez l'chol bria kula, which hints at all of creation. Mereshit havayata, from the beginning of its creation, derech hishtalsheluta, through its emanation, be'eses sferot chokhmah, through the 10 spheres of wisdom, netuot ad blima, which are suspended upon nothingness. Umimenu, from this tree, novea o elokim b'chol ha'anafim, the light of God flows in all of the branches. Ta'alim v'perot, and the leaves and the fruit, lahayir l'chol yitzorim, to illuminate all of, or to bring illumination to all of creation, kfi koach klitatam, according to their receptive capacity. Okay. He continues in the same vein until the end of the paragraph, and just to wrap up the paragraph, speaking of Kodesh Baruch Hu, he says, Shehu memaleh kol almin, v'sovev kol almin. He fills up the worlds and he transcendently surrounds the worlds. Veleit atar panui minei, and there is no place where he is not. There's no place where he is absent. Okay. Now, we just read 2 paragraphs which are overflowing with Kabbalistic resonance. The verse that he brings in the paragraph that begins Tu Pardes from Daniel, those verses appear repeatedly in Kabbalistic texts. And if you have a sensitivity to Kabbalistic language, the second paragraph is full of Kabbalistic terminology, which clearly flows from Rav Uziel's pen. Okay? The amazing thing is that he follows he continues in the following manner. Because he said, if you remember in that first paragraph where he brings the verses from Daniel, that the Tiul B'Pardes, the journey through paradise, has 2 branches. Okay? Ha'anaf HaRishon, the first branch, Mistef Me'ilan HaChaim Zeh, which branches off from this tree of life, Hu Derech HaSod VaKabbalah, is the way of, the Derech HaSod is the Kabbalistic way. V'hi darkam shel nevi'im, it's the way of the prophets, Shurach Hashem diber bam, that God's Spirit spoke within them. Hamidamim et Torah Yotzra, who they imaginatively project from the creation to the Creator. B'tzorat Adam HaKadmon v'Hashalem, in the image of the primordial perfect man. What's being hinted at here is that the universe is the macrocosm and man is the microcosm, that all of the universe, all of creation is one being. Uvaderech zo, and through this way, megeim ledat sodot hashgacha, we come to know the secrets of providence, v'ta'alumat yitzira shel yoter bereshit, and the secrets of the creation of the creator of bereshit, shehu mare da'alma kula, he's the master of this world. That this world is an entranceway into the world to come. Olam neshamot, the world of souls. And he continues with more Kabbalistic language until he says, "V'haemet agid." I'm going to tell you the truth. Tzari, I'm sorry to say, and ashamed, I didn't learn this chokhmah. And I don't know it. And in any case, it's not, you can't really reveal this knowledge in public, but only from a teacher to a student in a whispering manner, through hint and through allusion. Okay, now, this is amazing. We just have 3 paragraphs. This is the conclusion of the third, overflowing with Kabbalistic language. I'll add, Yedidi Rav Daniel Buskila spoke with Rav Avram Shalem. Rav Avram Shalem was a student at Yeshivat Sha'arei Tzion. Yeshivat Sha'arei Tzion was the yeshiva that Rav Uziel set up in 1940, that the Tzitz Eliezer was the Rosh Yeshiva. So Avram Shalem learned at that yeshiva, and he told Rav Daniel Buskila that they learned the Zohar with Rav Uziel. So the question is, what's going on? Right? The question should be clear. I hope the question is clear. So I asked my teacher, Professor Ze'ev Harvey, I brought this to his attention. I said, well, what do you think? And he said, oh, he's doing what the Ran did in the Ran's first drasha. Okay. So what does that mean? Okay. Rav Uziel's procedure in Hegyonei Uziel parallels the procedure of Rav Nisim of Girona, the Ran, in his first drasha. Comparing the texts, the Ran and Rav Uziel, will provide a model for understanding Rav Uziel's radical interpretive freedom and the boldness and the originality of his project. So before we dive in, just to take a look at a paragraph in the Ran's text, I'll say a word about who is the Ran, and the Ran is an acronym, Rabbeinu Nisim. Rabbi Nisim ben Reuven was a 14th century Sephardic rabbi, Talmudic commentator, thinker, and halachic authority. His legal works remain central elements of yeshiva study today. He's also the author of 11 drashot that remain classics of Jewish thought, including Jewish political thought and exegesis. Now, in his first drasha, which we're looking at over here, with this paragraph that you see before you is included in an article about the Ran, and so we have a translation of the Ran, which I'm going to use. In his first drasha, the Ran offers a commentary on the chapters of Genesis that are part and parcel of Ma'aseh Bereshit, the work of creation, which, according to the sages, can only be revealed to 2 students, at the most. For sure not to the entire public. But the Ran's drasha was offered to an audience of more than 2, and then published for the public at large. So, how does the Ran justify his procedure? The Ran justifies his procedure by saying that the prohibition against revealing the esoteric secrets is only relevant in those cases in which the person revealing the secrets either received a divine overflow or received the esoteric teaching through a line of teachers whose primary source is prophetic. If, however, you haven't received a revelation or a prophetic tradition, then, says the Ran, whenever you say cannot transgress the prohibition because you don't know the secrets. So let's see that in the inside, and then we'll see why that's important. Okay? So we're looking now at the first drasha of Drashot the Ran, and the Ran is turning to his audience and justifying how he can be offering his interpretation of Ma'aseh Bereshit. Okay? And I'm going to begin on the second line. One must surely be careful at the end of the second line. One must surely be careful when speaking before an audience on matters of the law, and especially on a subject of such glorious worth and supreme value as the account of the beginning, Ma'aseh Bereshit. For one who speaks on it is in one of 2 situations. Either he has knowledge of it or he doesn't. If he has knowledge of it, he transgresses the prohibition. One may not expound the account of the beginning to 2 persons. If he has no knowledge of it, he lies in his soul, makes light of the honor of the public, and exhibits haughtiness. Is there an escape? The answer is as follows. Everything we have said, this is the royal we, everything we have said about creation in this homily, and everything that all the sages have understood about it, unless by means of the divine overflow, is not included in the account of the beginning, concerning which our rabbis of blessed memory obligated those who know it to maintain secrecy and conceal it. Therefore, our remarks about creation are no different from the sermons given at weddings or on similar occasions. Okay. Wearing the humble garment of a wedding sermon, the Ran's drasha entered the venerable hall of Jewish texts that we continue to read centuries after they were composed. As Professor Harvey writes, regarding now the intention of the Ran here, the account of the beginning of the Ran explains is a secret doctrine that was revealed by means of the divine overflow and has been transmitted in an esoteric tradition He disclaims any knowledge of this doctrine. He did not receive a revelation by means of the divine overflow, and he has not been privy to the esoteric tradition. Since he doesn't know the secrets of the account of the beginning, he cannot possibly reveal them. He is thus free, and this is the crucial point, he is thus free to interpret the Bible in accordance with his own lights. His interpretations are no better and no worse than sermons delivered at a wedding. The Ran has kicked open wide the gates of exegesis and allegory. So let's go back to Rav Uziel. This, I argue, is what Rav Uziel is doing in Hegyonei Uziel. Rav Uziel writes 3 paragraphs overflowing in Kabbalistic language, which would seem to reflect, if not a mastery of the tradition, because we can't know after 3 paragraphs if you're a master of the tradition, but intimate familiarity. And when we read through Hegyonei Uziel, we see that he's deeply familiar, and he has mastery of the fundamentals in deploying the ideas and the terminology, the frameworks. So we have 3 paragraphs where he's using Kabbalistic terminology and Kabbalistic language. We know from one of his students that they learned the Zohar with him, but he says, I don't know this. Rav Uziel also disclaims any knowledge of the Kabbalistic doctrine. In so doing, he kicks wide open the gates of interpretation for himself. He is now free to use Kabbalistic vocabulary and concepts in constructing the spiritual palace of his thought and the garden paradise of the soul that he places in the center of his estate. Rav Uziel will continue by identifying himself with the way of machkar, the second branch, the way of rational investigation undertaken within boundaries set by traditional theology. However, at this point, I think we should stop and note that Rav Uziel was not the only graduate of Tiferet Yerushalayim to be remarkably free in his use of Kabbalistic literature. One of his contemporaries pursued a parallel intellectual, spiritual, interpretive project that reflects a shared spirit. Okay, up to this point, everything, if anything is not clear, please stop and let me know, or ask any questions. Okay. Meet the Renaissance man of Ottoman Sephardi Jerusalem, Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Ben Sion, born in 1880, passed away in 1932, a cultural political dynamo, a poet, writer, scholar, rabbi of the community of Monastir in 1913, and wildly successful fundraiser for the Zionist cause, who dedicated his talents to advancing the Zionist project, and most importantly for present purposes, turned to the free-spirited Sephardi mystics of the Zohar for articulating a uniquely, deeply rooted, but radically cosmopolitan Jewish Zionist vision. He was born in 1880, the same year as Rav Uziel. He learned with Rav Uziel in Tiferet Yerushalayim. Rabbi Dr. Aryeh Ben Sion passed away prematurely at the age of 52 in 1932, and Rav Uziel offered his eulogy, or one of the eulogies. And in his eulogy, Rav Uziel remembers how he and Ben Sion learned Gemara and Poskim together as young men. Ben Sion's father was a Mikubal at Yeshivat Beit El in Jerusalem's Old City. He authored 2 main works. The first work was the Hebrew language Sar Shalom Sharabi, and the English language, the Zohar in Muslim and Christian Spain. The first book, Sar Shalom Sharabi, bases itself upon the legendary figure of the Rashash, Sar Shalom Sharabi, born in 1720 in Yemen and deceased in 1777, when he served as the Rosh Yeshiva of Beitel in Jerusalem. Ben Sion reimagined the Rashash in a book that he calls, now this is in his introduction to Sar Shalom Sharabi, Ben Sion calls his book a Hazon Piuti Chofshi. It's one of the most beautiful Hebrew phrases that I've come across. Hazon Piuti Chofshi. You would say a free poetic vision, but piuti, even though the root of piut comes from poet, you can hear it, comes from the Greek, but piuti has a different charge than simply saying poetic. But anyways, he calls his book on the Rashash a Chazon Piuti Chofshi. Sar Shalom Sharabi is no longer in print in Hebrew, but the Zohar in Muslim and Christian Spain is still published by Routledge Press under the heading of Muslim Spain. Academic scholars occasionally write about Ben Sion. For students of Sufism, Ben Sion is the Sephardic rabbi in Jerusalem and Monastir who admired Ibn Arabi. For scholars of Hebrew literature, Ben Sion is the Zionist writer who strove to create a new Hebrew form that arises from within the life of Mizrahi tradition. For historians of Zionist history, Ben Sion was the representative of Keren HaYesod, who stood out as a charismatic speaker and preacher, traveling to win souls for Zionism based upon a, quote, symbolic and actual return to the East. While for scholars of Jewish mysticism, he is the author of a book that, since the rise of the academic study of Kabbalah, has fallen into oblivion. However, in his book, Ben Sion asks a good question. How much of the Zohar's vitality reflects the, quote, spirit of fantastic adventurousness with which all currents of Spanish life were impregnated? This is a spirit of fantastic adventurousness that, according to Ben Sion, the Zohar's authors shared with Spanish Christians and Muslims like Ramon Llull, Santa Teresa, Ibn Arabi, Ibn Tufayl. To be clear, Ben Sion believed that the Zohar's ideas are ancient, but Spanish Jews, not a Talmudic sage, composed the text. However, from Ben Sion's perspective, the Zohar's sanctity is enhanced, not diminished, when we recognize the shared Spanish sensibility that animated the soul of Judaism's mystical midrash. I quote from Ben Sion. The mystics of the peninsula were distinguished by the intensity with which they probed the heart of the mysteries, with courage and fearlessness that carried out their search for the infinite in the most dangerous and difficult of ways, and proving that he exists in all things. Ben Sion, like Rav Uziel, used the Kabbalistic tradition as material for his own vision of Judaism, which was also a rooted cosmopolitan vision of Judaism. While two scholars, childhood friends, are not sufficient to declare a school. And by the way, I haven't encountered anyone who's written about Ben Sion and Rav Uziel, or spoken about Ben Sion and Rav Uziel together. And I think they do deserve to be seen, from a certain perspective, together. While two figures are not sufficient to declare a school, the parallel manner in which Rav Uziel and Ben Sion transformed the Kabbalistic tradition, Rav Uziel using the model of the Ran, and Ben Sion in his own free literary way, but the parallel manner in which they transformed the Kabbalistic tradition into material for their interpretive projects testifies to a shared spirit. It's up to us, if we so wish, to study their works and to absorb this spirit and to carry it forward. I should add, however, that while I haven't seen any scholars who have brought them together, I am not alone in placing these two figures together. There is a precedent. But in order to uncover the precedent, we need first to buy a ticket to the Far East and to visit the remarkable Baghdadi Jewish community of Shanghai during the first half of the 20th century. Strange as it might sound, by visiting the Baghdadi Jewish community of Jazz Age Shanghai, we will encounter Rav Uziel speaking about the soul 30 years before Hegyonei Uziel, and Aryeh ben Sion sharing center stage and searching for the infinite in all things with Rabindranath Tagore. I don't know if you are familiar with that figure, but he is the Bengali language Nobel Prize winning writer who was the first non-Western writer to win the Nobel Prize. So let's set the stage. Beginning in the latter half of the 19th century, Baghdadi Jews began establishing networks from India through Singapore to Hong Kong and Shanghai and points in between. In the case of Shanghai, the Baghdadi Jewish community freely pursued its business, political, and spiritual interests in Shanghai's British-run international settlement. Perhaps you have read or heard about the Kaduris or the Sassoons. I know we have some Sassoons here in the audience today. There are many branches of the Sassoons who made fortunes while building homes and hotels that remain the pride of Shanghai today. Well, the Baghdadi Jewish community also published local news and big ideas in Israel's Messenger, an English language newspaper that was edited by N.E.B. Ezra. This is a picture of the 1929 Silver Jubilee edition of Israel's Messenger. I love it for the Chinese characters on the left, and then the artistic work, which is, as you can see, is influenced from the Bezalel school in Jerusalem, the Hebrew, and it's all together in one. And that's a vision of Herzl wafting in the clouds. The editor, N.E.B. Ezra, I should note, appears in contemporary Israeli writing about Israeli diplomacy in the Far East. Among the other things that N.E.B. Ezra did with this journal is he laid the foundation for Israel's diplomatic contacts across the Far East. So, for instance, in Meron Metzini's recent book about relations between Israel and Japan, he traces N.E.B. Ezra's influence and his relationship with Japanese figures. So this is the same editor of Israel's Messenger. So Shanghai's Baghdadi Jewish community established a Zionist association in 1903, and then Israel's Messenger was established in 1904. Under Ezra's editorship, the newspaper's masthead declared itself to be a fearless exponent of traditional Judaism and Jewish nationalism. Israel's Messenger accordingly included long-form essays that probed the depths of Judaism and the progress of the Zionist movement. The condition of Sephardi Jewry, broadly understood, was one of Ezra's special concerns, and he especially, in the pages of Israel's Messenger, featured two figures as embodiments of a robust Sephardic Judaism, Rav Uziel and Aryeh ben Sion. So, for instance, in 1925, now, if anyone's interested, I have written about in the Baghdadi Jewish community of Shanghai, a few articles about Ben Sion in this context, and I'll be happy to, if anyone's interested, to send on the links. But in April 1925, N.E.B. Ezra featured a letter from Rav Uziel under the heading, Chief Rabbi Ben Sion Uziel on the Outlook of Sephardic Jewry. This is a letter to the editor in 1925. It's worthwhile taking a brief look, as it will bring Uziel and Ben Sion together and bring us back to the introduction of Hegyonei Uziel. Okay. Rav Uziel opens his letter by thanking the Chinese Zionist organization. That I already love, right? The China Zionist organization. Just the strangeness of that sound, to remember that there was a Zionism in Shanghai at this period, is really fascinating. But he opens his letter by thanking the China Zionist organization for its assistance in establishing a secondary school in the land of Israel. And then he shares that it's already a long time since I aspired to this goal of establishing a school, and I long to see its actualization. The problem, well, can you see what I'm pointing to in the text? Okay. So writes Rav Uziel in his letter, when I look deeply into the near future with all its true colors, a shudder is passing through all my limbs, and a deep question is animating my, and I'll put the emphasis, soul. Will this Jewry live when deprived of its soul? And we can read on as Rav Uziel makes additional references to the soul. He refers to his own soul, the soul of Sephardi Jewry, and then goes on to use the term soul 2 more times in quick succession, referring to the soul of our Sephardi brethren thirsting for Zion, who find no response to the aspiration of their soul, and so remained nailed to their places. This remarkable letter testifies that the soul was already occupying Rav Uziel. It was central to his thinking in 1924. As I mentioned, Hegyonei Uziel was published at the end of his life, an active life informed by Jewish thought. Rav Uziel fully fleshed out his conception of the soul later. And then I want to point out a nice concluding element to this letter. Writes Rav Uziel to Nebi Ezra, with deep and great love, I submit hereby my thanks to your honorable president, Mr. E.S. Kadori, for his exemplary devotion to this work in conjunction with my beloved and dear friend, Dr. Ariel Ben-Sion. So we have Rav Uziel in Hegyonei Uziel acquiring interpretive freedom using the Ran's model to transform the Kabbalistic tradition into building material for his vision of the Pardes. And we have Rabbi Dr. Ariel Ben-Sion using the Kabbalistic tradition for his vision of the meaning of Judaism and Zionism. Nebi Ezra featured Rav Uziel in other contexts while giving center stage to Ben-Sion a number of times. And if we had more time, should we do this? So if we had more time, we'd take a look at this it's really an amazing event and document. Rabindranath Tagore visited Shanghai in 1924, and it was hosted by Eli Kadori at Marble Hall, which was a state-of-the-art, beautiful building that was commandeered by the communists after the revolution in 48. But he's hosting in 1924 Rabindranath Tagore at the hall and meeting the notables of the Jewish community. I would argue that this might be the meeting, and at this meeting, there were 2 speakers. After Eli Kadori gave a brief introduction, there were 2 speakers, Ariel Ben-Sion and Rabindranath Tagore. And the focus of their talk was Zionism. This is so beautifully subversive for certain conceptions we have today of the meaning of Zionism and the content of Jewish culture. But I would submit that this might be really the most profound meeting of a Jewish Zionist figure with a writer and spiritual figure of serious stature from the East. Now, at this time, Rabindranath Tagore was raising up a vision of Asia as this coherent whole in opposition to the West, and Kaduri and Ben-Zion are agreeing with him, and they're all talking about Zionism as an Asian movement. It's really a remarkable document. It's also in the meeting itself, Ben-Zion was fulfilling his vision, was living, embodying his vision of the meaning that he derived from the Zohar, of finding the divine in all things. And he found in Rabindranath Tagore a man of shared sensibility. So I bring this as an example of that, whereas we might not have scholars who put Rav Uziel and Ariel Ben-Zion together, we do have a precedent, which is in the pages of Israel's Messenger and in the vision of N.E.B. Ezra. Okay, and I see that we're really getting close to running out of time. So let me bring things home, and then we'll see if we have any, if you have any questions. All right. So let's go back to Hegyonei Uziel and wrap things up. In the introduction to Hegyonei Uziel, Rav Uziel introduces the soul and the soul's connection to God as the highest object of Jewish study, the enchanted garden of contemplation. Along the way, he transforms the Kabbalistic tradition into raw material for constructing his vision. Then, in the first section, in delineating the contours of the soul, Rav Uziel integrates the Tselem Elohim, the image of God, according to Rav Saadia Gaon's understanding of power and rule, together with a traditional intellectual spiritual understanding of the neshama. And I would argue that Rav Uziel's adoption of Rav Saadia's emphasis on power and rule is consistent with the kingly version, Malchut, the spirituality that includes Malchut, that we discussed earlier. Rav Uziel goes on, and he basing himself upon the 13th century Ḥakham Hillel of Verona. And it's really a remarkable thing. No one today reads Hillel of Verona. But Rav Uziel is reading Hillel of Verona, and based upon Hillel of Verona, he determines that all of humanity shares a single soul that is individuated in bodies. Rav Uziel's understanding of God's universe is meritocratic. We are judged according, all human beings are judged according to the degree to which we augment the power of the soul or diminish it. He interprets Histalkut Shechina along the same terms. Histalkut Shechina, the removal of the Shechina for him refers to the soul being diminished. If a person lives in such a way that the soul's power is diminished and becomes more hidden, that is for him Histalkut Shechina. In learning in this way, he of course preempts an exclusively nationalist understanding of the Shekhinah. He argues, Rav Uziel, that all souls are equal in their emanation from the source, but that human beings, as I mentioned, are judged to whether they augment the power of the soul or not. God lets us, according to Rav Uziel, pave our own way in augmenting our souls in the world through the use of our free will and the application of our minds. Rav Uziel argues that the Torah was given to augment the soul. That's the purpose of the Torah. We're coming upon Shavuot. You can have this percolate in your minds. That the purpose of the Torah was given to augment the soul of the nation of Israel as a whole and every individual therein. And then Rav Uziel embarks upon an extended discussion of reward and punishment that leads to a surprising but heroic peak. Afflictions are also given to augment the power of the soul. Afflictions, writes Rav Uziel, are the divine reward that God gave to our world. Now, from what perspective can this make sense? From the perspective of the soul. And in this context, Rav Uziel brings the Mishnah in the 9th chapter of Masechet Brachot, Chayav Adam levarecha l'ra'a kishem shemevarecha l'tova. A human being is obligated to bless evil as he or she blesses good. Rav Uziel's understanding is that by relating to everything as an opportunity to augment the power of the soul, we, as such, bless both evil and good. So I know that this has been wholly unsatisfactory in terms of doing justice to Hegyonei Uziel itself. It's the tip of the iceberg. But I hope that the presentation has been clear and intriguing and encouraging, and that you all are now encouraged to go explore Rabbi Uziel for yourselves. And if you have any thoughts or questions, I'll be happy to hear them. And thank you very much for this opportunity. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tepper, for that masterful presentation. And if there are any questions, please unmute and go ahead to ask.
And also my view is that got the main speaker and then above. Can you make just a gallery view of the? So
Yes,
like,
sure. Any questions from anyone?
No, you don't have to have any.
Fine. Okay, thank you very much then. We'll end with that. Thank you for that presentation. Thank you for the 2 courses you've given us now, the 2 classes you've given us. We look forward to hopefully welcoming you back at another point in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of you. And Chag Sameach.